And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again, we've got snow gradually shifting eastward here, becoming lighter across the whole area, and still a chance of snow here south central Alaska as this low develops in Cook Inlet and then kind of swings southeastward. This system here bringing more rain and gusty winds, especially into the southern southeast coast of that warm front, with the rain spreading northward tomorrow and the low tracking slowly north off the coast. That'll create some gusty winds over the southern southeast coast. Drier conditions beginning to develop as cold Arctic air filters and seeps southeastward across the Alaska Range into south central Alaska, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay. High pressure starting to develop over the interior here, and we'll see on Sunday colder, drier over all of interior Alaska. Chance of light snow up here in the northwest with a couple of weak troughs there. This low finally shifting into western Canada slowly, so precipitation becoming lighter, more scattered, or lighter, and more scattered in the showers as well there, especially in the late afternoon. No precipitation here south central Alaska to Kodiak Island, all the way up into the interior. Variably cloudy skies and light winds. Light winds here for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast, south to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots for the south coast. And for Clarence Strait, small craft advisory, south winds 25 knots. Central northern inner channels, light south winds at 10 knots. And for the north coast here, south winds at about 10 knots. And for the day on Saturday, here along the central and south coast, winds west 20 knots, seas 9 feet. West-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots up there to the north. Variable winds at 10 knots for the central northern inner channels, and still a small craft advisory for Clarence Strait. Southwest winds 25 knots. And for the eastern North Gulf, eastern North Gulf Coast Friday, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, south winds 20 knots, Prince William Sound. Gale warnings for the western North Gulf Coast, north at 35 knots and higher gusts, especially up in toward Resurrection Bay. Storm warnings for Kamishak Bay, northwest winds at 50 knots. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Saturday, Prince William Sound, north winds 30 knots. Gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast, north winds 30 to 40 knots. And gale warnings continue here for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, northwesterlies 35 to 40 knots, and north winds at about 15 knots for Cook Inlet. And then Kodiak Island on Friday, northwest winds 30 to 40 knots with higher gusts, and northwest 25 for Bristol Bay. The Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. And for Saturday, Kodiak Island, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, west at 15 for Bristol Bay. And for the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, light variable wind conditions with seas down to 2 to 3 feet. Bering Sea side, not too bad either, southwest at about 15 with 5-foot seas. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Adak and Atka, north winds 15 to 20 knots. And west-northwest 20-knot winds for the western Aleutians. And then on Saturday, winds pick up out here for the western Aleutians, Kiska to Shimei and Attu, especially over toward the western islands there, coming up to gale force from the south late in the day ahead of a big storm that's well out to the west. Otherwise, Adak and Atka, northwest 20 knots, and west-northwest 20-knot winds for the eastern Aleutians. And then for the southwest coast here, south of Nunivak Island, northwest winds 20 knots. Yukon Delta coast west at 10 knots. St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, westerlies 15 to 20 knots. 15-knot winds from the west-southwest for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island. Then on Saturday, west at 15 for St. Matthew Island, northwest 15 for the Pribilofs, west-northwest at 10 for the southwest coast, and 15-knot westerlies for St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea Friday, north to northwest winds at 10 knots. Southwest 15 for the central coast, 20 knots from the southwest for the western coast, and the Chukchi Sea, west to southwest winds at only 10 to 15 knots. And then on Saturday, mainly west winds 15 to 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea, western Arctic coast, small craft advisory, southwest 25-knot winds there, turning south at 25 knots. for Saturday on the central Arctic coast. South 20 for the east side here, dropping off to about southwest at 10. There from Barter Island to Demarcation Point.